and the anxiety and the uncertainty, and you've seen people respond out of those places of fear and anxiety and uncertainty and do some things. And clearly what we recognize is that they're not standing upon a foundation that is built with the power of God, knowing that the God of all creation is with them, is for them, is caring for them, and loves them. And we need to make sure that that power is known in everyone's lives. Now let me bring this down to a more personal level for us. So that money changer at the temple, right, they weren't just doing a good deed. So you give me a Roman coin, and it has a face of Caesar on it, so you can't give it in the temple. So I'm going to give you a coin, a Hebrew coin in exchange, and then you can take that into the temple. The way it worked is that I brought you $30 worth of Roman coins, and I cannot faithfully give this as an offering to God, and I must exchange it with you. And so what you do is I give you my $30 worth of Roman coins, and you give me in return $3 worth of Hebrew coins. And so now my offering, rather than $30 to God, is $3. They were cheating people. In the same way that the seller of the doves was cheating people. So before I could enter the temple, before I could go before God, I needed to do a burnt offering. Well, if I've traveled for days and days by foot, I can't bring my animals with me. And I may not even be wealthy enough to have animals, but I still need an audience before God. And so you know that I am obligated to do the burnt offering. And so you're going to sell me this dove. Now at home, I can buy this dove for 50 cents. But here in front of the temple, the only place to buy it, I have to buy this dove for $50. Again, does that sound like anybody who you have heard about this week? Does that sound like people who are going to the grocery store and buying up all the stock of paper products? Filling their basket full of paper products for their family of 3 or 4? Out of fear, not allowing other people who might have need also to have that. Not allowing some of the vulnerable to have what they have because they are amassing for themselves? Does that sound like the hand sanitizer resellers out there online that you have heard about? Take a little bottle of hand sanitizer that would usually cost $2.50 and sell it for $25. Does that sound like some of the people perhaps you have heard that refuse to accept any kind of social distancing or not going out because, they're vital, they're healthy, they don't need to worry about this virus, and they're not at all concerned about the ways in which they might receive the virus and pass it to someone who is vulnerable. They're just watching out for themselves. It's as if sometimes people get a foothold on some form of power over another, and that becomes their golden ticket in life. And so the honest Lenten question for us on this day is this: is there a way that you use your power to lift yourself up and to diminish another? Is there a way that you use your power to lift yourself up while diminishing another? Have you ever had the opposite happen? I've had a couple pastors I worked for, and these pastors were great at lifting others up. They didn't need an accolade ever. Everyone around them, they just lifted up. I've also worked for another pastor who was just the opposite, and he made it known everywhere he went that he was at the top of the food chain, that he was the most important. And I'll tell you, out of those 3 relationships, it's very clear to me which one brought more life, which one brought more faith, which one made me a better person, which one brought me closer to God, which one made me a better Christian. Can you think of anyone in your life? Either way. Someone who has constantly used their power to lift you up closer to God. Or someone who has used their power to lift themselves up and thereby diminish you. Now, if our godly power as a church is to welcome people so that they might encounter God's transforming love, and in order to do that, we have to surrender our power that seeks to lift ourselves up, and that's what we have to do. And if our personal power is meant to lift others up to be closer to God in life, then we must surrender any power that tries to lift self and to diminish the other. Remember the disciples walking behind Jesus and James and John, they're having a question about which one of them is the greatest. Now, I'm not sure that they actually came up with an answer of which one of them is the greatest, but they did certainly come to believe that they, as those two, were greater than the other 10 disciples who were back at home. A question about lifting themselves up and in turn diminishing the other. Well, in a couple weeks, our hope is that we get to celebrate Maundy Thursday together. And at Maundy Thursday, it's Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. And if you remember, at the end of the supper, do you remember what he does? He gets up from the table and he takes just a servant's cloth and he ties it around himself. And he kneels before his disciples and he washes their feet, surrendering his power that they might be lifted up. You know, when we surrender our power, it gives evidence of God's power. When we surrender our power, it allows people to experience the power of God. This is certainly a time in which the power of God is needed. The power of God is needed most in times of crisis, in times of fear, in times of anxiety. And there's a lot of people experiencing that in our world right now. And there's some who they will act in defiance to social distancing or gathering of people, in defiance to caring for the most vulnerable. There's some who will buy up all that they can and save themselves first and not think about the other. There's some that'll play on the market of products like hand sanitizer or cleansing wipes. And all of those are acts of human power that simply raise those individuals and diminish others. Well, when we can all gather here again together and we can share stories with one another, I look forward to hearing stories about ways in which you as a community, as a spiritual community, as followers of Christ, surrendered your power so that God's power might be known. I look forward to ways, because I'm sure that I will hear stories of some of you who spent time every single day calling people in the church and outside the church that are the most vulnerable, that aren't connected to social media, and so they became very isolated during this time, except for your phone calls to them that kept them connected and feeling known. I look forward to stories where I know some of you will have gone out and gone shopping. Your neighbor is sick, is vulnerable, doesn't need to be out and in any more danger than he or she is in. So instead of them going out, you went out for them. And you got the things that they needed and delivered it to them so that they might be less vulnerable. I look forward to the stories of ways in which I know some of you will quell the fears and anxieties of the world through acts of prayer, rather than feeding the fears and anxieties in the world through forwarding all kinds of different social media news around. I look forward to the ways in which I will hear how some of you accepted, sure, with sadness and disappointment, that certain events and activities that you were looking forward to were canceled. But with sadness, you accepted it. With grace, you accepted it. And you turned away from acts of hatred or suspicion or racism towards any groups of people who are receiving that in these times. If there is ever a time, now is the time for the power of God to be known. And in order for the power of God to be known, we must put down our power. In order for the power of God to be known, we must surrender. We must surrender our power to the power of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
upon it, out of thy redeeming love. Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposes precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy grace, Lord, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. There is a place prepared for me, more beautiful than eyes have seen. When these burdens weigh me down, I won't lose heart, I will not doubt. Grace will lead me home. Grace will lead me home through every trial I have gone. Only your grace will lead me home. There is an end to suffering, where I will rest in perfect peace, in the presence of the King. My eyes will see, I believed. Grace will lead me home. Grace will lead me home through every trial I have gone. Only your grace will lead me home.
Amen. As we come to the end of this time together, let me say a couple things about rituals that we would generally partake in together if we were here in worship. So one of them has to do with this this offering plate before us, and generally this plate would be placed up here as you came for communion. Some of you would place gifts into this plate. Every week I say that some of the gifts that God is calling forth from us will fit into these plates. Most are given out of our lives into the lives of others. And so there are ways in which you can continue your pledge and continue your giving. Many of you do that electronically already. You can look on our website. You can drop off gifts. You can mail gifts. We invite you to continue to do this as the church stays open and those expenses of the church stay open. But this might be an even more important time for you to think about the kind of gifts that you give out of your life into the lives of others. And may God multiply and magnify the gifts that you share with one another during this time that we are apart from one another. We also have the communion elements that are lying before us this morning, and they will stay here rather than being shared. In this service, every week, we partake of Holy Communion. And let me just remind you that before it was a sacrament that was blessed by our clergy and that had the formality that it has today, it began as a meal that Jesus shared with his disciples. And at the end of that meal, he said to them, whenever you gather together, whenever you break bread together, take bread and take this cup. Whenever you eat of this, whenever you drink of this, remember that I am with you. And so we may not be able to take communion, Holy Communion, in the way that we generally do. I invite you, as you break bread with family and friends during this time in which we are physically apart from one another, that every time you do so, you remember of God's enduring presence with you, that Christ is with you during this time. A couple of announcements. Many of you I know are wondering what comes next in our spiritual life together. So a few things that you can do. One, at the bottom of this video that you're watching now, there's a link where you can click to register your attendance. It would be helpful for us to know who's watching this so that we know how to get the content out. You should check our website early and often over this next week and the next couple of weeks, fumccv.org. And that is all of, right there on the homepage, at the bottom of the homepage, all the announcements and what we're doing and what's open and what's closed will be listed as often as we get that information. Our hope next week is that we are live streaming worship services, and so there will be an 8 o'clock service, a 9:30 service, and an 11 o'clock service in all the ways that you generally worship. And you would just do that from home. And you can either watch them at that time or they're recorded, so you can watch them anytime after that. And we're working on that, and we'll have that up. Also, you should, I hope that you are making use of our Lenten devotional. So you might remember picking one of these up. This is our Lenten prayer guide for this year. For every week during Lent, there's a different prayer guide. There are activities for every single day, activities of prayer or action that help you walk deeper into relationship with God during this Lenten season. And let me just point out, two things. One, if you don't have one of these, they're available in the narthex. They're available in the lobby of the office. So you can, I saw them there this morning, you can pick them up. There's plenty of them for you. This week, ironically, so the first action of this week says this: limit yourself to checking emails, texts, or social media to only once today. We didn't know 2 months ago when we put this together that we would be in this situation and that social media and emails and texts might be the only way that some of us stay connected. So let me just revise that a little bit and say, might we on one day this week, might you only use that kind of technology to spread the best kind of news, to make the best kind of connections, to not get lost in all this stuff. but to use it to lift yourself and to lift others up. Also, the church staff is going to be busy. Every day, they are going to be pushing out content. You're going to see worship services. You're going to see Bible studies, ministries from the music ministries, children's ministry messages, opportunities for youth to gather electronically together. And so, our job as a staff is to serve you as a congregation. Our job as a staff is to help you live out your life in relationship to God. We're going to continue doing that, whether we're here together on this campus or not. And so you'll see that information come out early and often as well. If you're on one of our committees, all the meetings will continue to happen. You'll get an email tomorrow that'll give you directions about how to call in or get video conferenced into that. But the business of the church goes on, and we'll continue to do that work. We'll just do it in a different format than usual. And let me ask this favor of you. If you know people in our church, or if you have people, people sort of in your circle of influence, your community, who are not connected online, who don't have the ability to stay connected to people as some of us do during these times, what's going to happen to those people is that they're going to become even more isolated than they already are. Please call us at the church office. Let us know the names and numbers of those people, because we have a group of volunteers who are working to stay connected, to make phone calls, to deliver some material to them. So they may not be able to get it as you and I would online, but we'll still get it to them, and we want those folks to know that they're loved and that they are cared for. So we've come to the end of this time together. It's different than we would ever be, but let me end it together in the way that we always end this service, and that is to say, we believe that God brings us to this place so that God can do something in our lives. Because now God wants to send us out into the world so that God can do something through our lives. May that be true of your story this week. Go in peace. God bless.